I'm Tori Bedford. Tonight on Greater Boston, local anti-violence activists are meeting to call for more support for vulnerable young people in Boston to break the cycles of gang violence and incarceration. Plus, former Cannabis Control Commission member Shaleen, who also wrote the ballot question that legalized weed in this state, is now setting her sights on the federal level. It's been a deadly year in America, including here in Massachusetts. 16 people have been murdered in Boston so far this year, and the city's largest neighborhood is also its most affected, Dorchester. 5 people have been shot and killed there, up from just 2 at the same time last year. The mayor's office has already pledged to intervene, promising to cut homicides in the city by 20% in the next few years, which would bring the city to a 25-year low. A final plan is expected to come later this month, highlighting a key issue: young people affected by gang violence. It's also a top priority for local anti-violence activists, a group of whom will meet later this week in Dorchester to campaign for better outreach, job programs, and criminal justice reform. Organizers will also screen parts of the 2020 documentary, This Ain't Normal, which spotlights 5 young gang members in Boston and the efforts of mentors and social workers to break the cycle of violence.
We lost our first friend at 15. He died at 15. 2004, lost another one. 2005, lost another one. 2006, lost 2 more.
These young men really need to see, that positive image of who they really could be.
We have to teach the young brothers and sisters in our community what it means to live.
I'm joined now by one of the people featured in that documentary, Donald Osgood Sr., Interim Director of the Neighborhood Trauma Team Network, and Ruth Zakarin, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence and the host of Thursday's event. Donald Osgood Sr. and Ruth Zakarin, thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for being here. I want to talk about this film. I feel like we are at this moment right now in Boston where, if we look at just the numbers, we talk about homicides, things have been pretty consistently low in terms of the numbers, but if you talk to anybody who's living in the most affected neighborhoods in Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, it doesn't feel low. And we've had a few really high-profile cases involving kids as young as 14 in the last couple of years. How did this movie kind of come about, and what are your thoughts on it now, just a couple of years out, as we're seeing in recent years this spike in youth-involved crime?
So the film initially was to raise money to keep Street Safe Boston, in operation, and they were supposed to follow the street workers. And once they started coming out with a few of us who agreed to do it, the young people wanted to tell their stories. So Coach Dennis and Rudy Hippolyte, they decided, let's tell the story of the young people and give them a life, make the human side sing. So they started working on that, and the young people had a lot to say. And, you look at it from 2 years, and we're talking the films, we started doing the film in 2013, so it didn't really get released until 2020. But from 2020 to now, we're missing Street Safe Boston. Street Safe Boston shut down 2014, the beginning of 2015. And since then, it's been different. We were able to do a lot of unconventional things. There were no unions to hold us back, so we were sometimes up late night talking to different people when shootings happened, just to make sure that nothing else happened, no retaliation. So, yeah.
How long have you been doing this work?
So, unofficially, I was doing this work just in my neighborhood, throughout the city. I grew up here. And in 2013, I had an opportunity to work with Street Safe Boston, which elevated the work that I was doing. And not only was I working with the youth, I was also doing response work with Street Safe Boston, and we partnered with VIA, our Violence Intervention Advocacy Program at Boston Medical Center, where we responded to just about every shooting and stabbing. And I did that for 6 years before I transitioned to the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, which helps families in that first 24 to 72 hours of a homicide.
Yeah. This is a question, I guess, for both of you, but I'm curious about your perspective, Ruth. this moment in time, right? When we talked about the numbers, murders are down, or some of these high-profile cases involving young people. Those are really alarming. And when we look at how things have changed, do you feel like right now there is this crisis? We've talked a little bit about how the city's responding. District Attorney Kevin Hayden has also launched a couple of efforts to try to respond in some way, and there's supposedly some kind of movement that's happening. I know there's a lot of activists that are working towards creating a more unified movement. I'm curious just what you think we're seeing now that maybe we haven't seen in previous years, or what is required now if we're reaching this point where we're kind of reaching a crisis?
Yeah, I always think about the fact that the statistics don't tell the full story of the trauma that people are experiencing, particularly in the neighborhoods that are most affected. So the numbers can only tell us a little bit, and I think that's the power of this film, is telling those stories, both of the young people who have been impacted by violence and the people who are showing up day in and day out for those young people. And ultimately, if we have one death from gun violence, one family bereaved, one community traumatized, we have a crisis. We shouldn't have any deaths from gun violence. There are ways to prevent this and make this narrative different. And so I think we're at a moment of really recognizing that there is more that needs to be done, that this should be a solvable problem, and we have to have the will to solve it.
You had organizers recently. I covered a die-in, which is organized by Teen Empowerment. You had some representatives there. Kids went out, really young kids, all from Dorchester, Roxbury, surrounding neighborhoods, and they were really invested in demonstrating and showing that they truly care about this issue and that it's meaningful to them. And I found it really powerful because I think sometimes there's a couple of different narratives. One is that, communities have to deal with this for themselves, which is very flawed because that wouldn't even really be possible. But there's a lot of stuff generating from communities, but also that people don't care in these communities. And these kids were showing that people absolutely do care and are just fed up. And at the same time, these are young people, and I really appreciate the name of the movie, because these are young people who over and over have told me it becomes normalized, right? It's something that we experience and we see, and we can't have time to process the trauma of one killing by the time that we hear about the next one, or maybe that was your friend or your loved one or your family member. So I'm curious just what your kind of takeaway was from that event and from the similar push that you've seen.
Yeah, Teen Empowerment has been really incredible around empowering young people in this conversation. And the idea, the way that I understood it, is that they stop traffic because business should not go on as normal when people are dying and people are experiencing trauma. And I think the way that they engage the entire community is really symbolic of what coalition building is. Young people have a strong voice, but we adults have to keep on showing up for young people and with young people and adding our voices to calling for solutions and actually making change happen.
There have been calls I know the movie was made in 2020, and there were calls around that time and during the protests in the wake of the death of George Floyd to remove school resource officers from schools in Boston. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about that and the evolution of that and the role of police, because I've looked at how violence affected communities since Boston had this huge spike of youth violence in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We saw the Boston Miracle, which is where these homicides were brought down by, I think, like 65% per month. And a lot of that was credited to relationships that activists had with police at the time, and with this overall effort throughout the city, this kind of organized effort throughout the city. But I wonder now, do you think that with the relationships that exist between the police and activists and advocates and the clergy and everybody else, do you think that it's possible to get back to that, or is that something that needs to be worked towards?
So I think it's possible, but I think it's going to take a lot more work than what we are able to do at this moment. We have a lot of things going on, and I think during the George Floyd era, and the defunding police, I think the message was wrong. You know, maybe it should have been a cry for restructuring, you know, more training and things like that, because there's still a lot of great relationships. I can't do the work I do without law enforcement, and it's not a two-way thing, you know, like the law enforcement sometimes will give us some things that we need to support families, but we don't give information, you know, otherwise then we could be, you know, putting ourselves in harm's way as well. So I think the relationships are very important. The trust building is very important. And when you think about the Boston public school system, you know, pulling out the resource officers at the time I think was a bad idea. But I know that right now they're working on adding more youth workers to the school system, which I think will be great. You know, my only concern is always the summertime, because there's not enough for young people to do. You know, we do have a lot of jobs that are available, private and city jobs right now for our young people, but some young people don't want to do that. So I think really wrapping around and working together, and I think this is the last thing I say to that. You know, if we as coalition building, right, we start to work together, I think, and we lead the young people by example, I think that would actually be a great asset, because young people, they follow what they see. And so if we want to see them do the right thing, then us as adults have to do the right thing as well.
Mental health has been a huge issue for young people in the last couple of years, especially for young people living in these communities that are most impacted by violence. The Boston Globe they did an analysis of police interactions since 2016, and I think 51 out of 88 of them were people experiencing a mental health crisis. So I wonder how that kind of falls. I know we're talking about adults in that context as well, but when you've got young people in schools who are acting out after COVID, that was very traumatizing, this compounding violence and trauma, how do things fall into that conversation? You mentioned bringing in youth workers, which I think is probably key.
Right. So with mental health, one of the things with the mental health piece, you know, I have 2 young sons, so they were also involved in the, 2020, like COVID work, going to school from home. I think that had a huge impact on a lot of the kids, because there wasn't that, you know, I don't get to see my friend in person. Now we're seeing each other on Zoom. Or now we can't go outside, all those different things. So, you know, young people have to move around. And so I think 2020 just kind of pushed all the young people down. So the ones that made it through to graduate, you know, kudos to them. But with the mental health piece and police, I think it's just more training. You know, we have to utilize new techniques, right? Our old techniques don't work, because this is just a new time, new generation of people. Young people have a stronger voice than they did, you know. And our day it was, you know, do what I say, but don't do as I do. Right now, young people, they have a voice, and, you know, if I don't like what you're doing, I'm not gonna do it. And if you want me to do something, you have to tell me why. So really working on being culturally competent when we deal with the young people, having more therapists and, you know, teachers that look like the youth that they serve. Right? I think that's one of the biggest things that will be a huge help in, you know, bridging gaps with mental health, bridging gaps with law enforcement, you know, bridging gaps with, you know, community violence. And the last thing I'll add in there, we don't talk enough about is, you know, mediation, teaching people mediation techniques, you know, teaching young people how to express themselves, that there is a way to do it without resorting to violence.
Yeah, and if I can just add that one of the really powerful things about the film is, as it tells the story of these young people, it really highlights how much trauma they have all been through. And you have a different understanding of young people who've been involved with violence and all of the things that came before the violent incident happened. And for me, I'm also a licensed mental health clinician by background. I did trauma response for many years. And for me, when I think about prevention, violence prevention, any kind of prevention, for me, it's really about making sure that young people, all people, have what they need to be safe and well. We can't expect them to be safe and well if they don't have those resources. So I think a lot about how are we responding to this trauma that collectively young people have experienced, and individually what has happened in their own homes and in their communities. And how are we adults showing up to support them with that?
Yeah. What do you think people, quickly, we have just about a minute, but what do you think people don't understand about this issue? What do people need to understand? Because you work with young people, right? And I think...
Yes. I think one of the misconceptions is that most of these young people are animals and that this is what they want to do, right? And I don't think I've met a person on the planet who's woke up and said to themselves, you know, I think I'm going to die today, or I think I want to get shot today or stabbed today, right? So I think that is the first beginning to really humanize people. Like, we're all humans. And, you know, to Ruth's point, if we don't have the resources in the communities for the young people, right, you know, the system is kind of stacked against them. And until we understand that, you know, we'll go around in circles, we'll come up with this plan, we'll come up with that plan, but really, you know, changing a lot of the laws, you know, which have a negative impact in certain communities, right? Because it's designed to do what it does. But, you know, knowing that these young people, they love their moms, they love their dads, they love their children, they love their nanas. And when you see them like kids, right, most times you'll see a young person portrayed, they're 14, right? Young black man, 14, young black child, 14, but he's a black man when he's portrayed in the news media, right? So I think seeing them as children and not animals, that's what the film did.
Yeah,
the film said, see this young fella and see him playing with his daughter and how much fun his daughter is having with her dad that she loves a whole lot.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you so much, both of you. Donald Osgood Sr., Ruth Zakarin, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
It was our pleasure. Being with us. Yes.
Next up, despite overwhelming support from the majority of Americans and despite legalization in 23 states, cannabis is still outlawed at the federal level. But the activist who wrote the 2016 ballot question that legalized the drug in this state is now focusing her efforts on the rest of the country. Shaleen, who also served on the state's Cannabis Control Commission for the first few years of the industry, is hosting a crash course on the fight for federal legalization later this week as the founder and CEO of Parabola Center, a drug policy think tank. She joins me now. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on and talking about this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so where are we now? Like, do you have any sense of how far away we are from federal legalization of recreational marijuana?
Well, I think a lot of people see it as inevitable at this point. It's not clear how many years it will take, but the design, the structure is being built now, and that's why it's so important for people to learn about it and to get involved.
So when you say the design and the structure, what can we learn from legalization across states that have already been going through this process? Because in many ways, I think, you know, we've been at this for, what, 7 years?
Yeah, since 2016.
Yeah, and so it still feels sometimes like we're just learning and figuring it out and like it's the Wild West. So in terms of making preparations for federal legalization, what are some of the major concerns that you're hoping people will really focus on?
So I think there's two sets of concerns, one from cannabis and one from other industries. So Massachusetts is actually pretty far ahead because 7 years of data is a lot. We've learned that it's really important to prevent monopolization and to promote equity and public health. So there's a lot of lessons there, especially on equity. We learned that capital is really important, real estate, all these lessons for small businesses. But then from other industries, we don't want to see the problems that we saw in big tobacco, big pharma. And I think people intuitively understand this, but the reason we need a crash course about it is because it will take a broad movement to keep these few companies from coming in and taking over and really ruining all the progress that we've made in places like Massachusetts.
So even in Massachusetts, where we have been working on some equity programs, I think a lot of people have found that it hasn't necessarily delivered on the promise that people who had been incarcerated for or had been victims of the war on drugs, they were not necessarily always the first in line, right, to be able to receive licenses or gain capital. The capital, as you mentioned, is like a huge issue. If you just don't have the money, how are you going to be able to put any of this together, right? Even if you get the licenses and you go through all of this red tape. I think people are still struggling here with that equity. And so when you say that we've learned those lessons in Massachusetts, I think, is it fair to say that we've learned a lot of them the hard way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but we are avoiding more hard lessons to come, right? Because what we know for sure about federal legalization is it's going to change everything, right? And what we can do is use these lessons and say, for example, capital is really important. We want to make sure that every state is adequately funded for expungement, for loans and grants, all of these things that we've learned. But on the other hand, the way we seem to be headed now is there are a few corporations that are leading on what will be in these federal bills. And that is just wrong, and it's also foolish because it doesn't take into account all of these states' lessons. So that's why it's so important for people to understand these things. And that's why we're having a crash course for people who don't have the time to really dig into this, but they have maybe a few hours a year, and they can come and learn and then make sure that legalization is right, because we can only do this once, and that will be the foundation upon which the marijuana market and laws will be built for generations to come.
I know we were saying we don't maybe know when it feels looming, but we don't know when federal legalization might come. But you mentioned these corporations that have been waiting in the wings, right? Like, who is more prepared right now than the tobacco industry, for example, right? Because what would that mean for them when federal legalization comes down? Like, what is already, who is that, and what are they doing? What kind of preparations have they made?
Well, so here's the good thing. The legalization movement started in the 70s and 80s by a small group of AIDS activists. Actually, it's great that it's apt that this is taking place right before the Pride Parade, because they were the ones in San Francisco who started all of this by saying it's cruel that we're arresting medical marijuana patients. And that's really why we have legal marijuana in so many places now. We have 40 years, really, of activists working hard. But just now, in the past couple of years, as we're 90% of the way there, Amazon has started lobbying, Big Tobacco has started making acquisitions, and basically they're poised to say, we're the ones who are going to push it across the finish line and make it so that the marijuana plant is something that a few companies can monopolize for profit. And I think people intuitively understand that's not what we want. What we want is to honor the vision of these original activists and, you know, what people want, which is to protect patients, consumers, workers. So that's what we'll be talking about on Saturday.
One of the issues that has come up a lot generally in the case of multi-state operators or these big corporations that own a lot of shops across the country in states where it's legal are safety issues. And so I know at Harvard a few years ago there was, they did this thing with Commonwealth Magazine where they tested, this professor in this lab tested a ton of different samples from different shops and found that things really differed in terms of THC level. There were some contaminants that, you know, had been said that they were tested out, but weren't. There's a real kind of range in terms of quality in labs that still needs to be dealt with here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do those issues, because that also plays into worker safety and safety for consumers, because consumers deserve to know what they're getting. Right? Like the whole reason we wanted recreational marijuana was so that you could buy something and know what it was.
Exactly.
But if that label isn't necessarily accurate, I mean, that's a huge issue that we're dealing with here and in other states where legalization is the case. How is that being thought about in the context of federal marijuana legalization? Yeah,
that's a huge issue. So we have, for example, the National Policy Director of the UFCW union, which represents the most cannabis workers, coming to talk about this on Saturday, because we want to make sure that workers are protected and not exploited. But if we let this be a free-for-all and we don't intentionally take these standards into account and worker protections into account, then no one is going to protect them, right? And certainly not these corporations, which, by the way, because it's federally illegal, the largest corporations are not involved yet. The ones that we're talking about are quite small, and they're still, you know, we're still seeing so many problems. So this is what I mean when I say we have lessons that we've learned.
Right. That's so even on that scale, comparatively, like it might be a big multi-state operator in terms of the marijuana industry, but it's not an Amazon warehouse full of marijuana plants, which I guess is what is sort of the hope of some of the corporations, right, of what's being envisioned.
Exactly. So that's what we can prevent if we start now.
Yeah. What are some of the other kind of things that you really want people to be able to focus on at the crash course?
So protecting medical patients is huge because, like I said, they were the ones who started this whole movement. But if we end up with a monopolized industry, they won't be able to afford their medicine. They won't get the strains that they need because it's not profitable enough. Insurance won't cover them. So that's important. Worker safety. We'll be talking about protecting indigenous populations as well. And then Senator Warren and Senator Markey are giving special messages to open this because I think they understand the importance of fairness and competition and how big of an opportunity we have to do this right now, this short window that we have.
Right. I think there's so much money to be made, but people talk about returning to the root of what this is all about, like in the 70s you mentioned as well, right? Like this is medicine.
Medicine and compassion for people, absolutely.
Great. All right. Shaleen Title, thank you so much for joining me and for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
For more information on their work and this Saturday's event, head to parabolacenter.com. That's it for tonight. I'm Tori Bedford. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Wait, did I just commit a crime? Hey folks, I'm Edgar B. Harwick III from GBH's Curiosity Desk, where you ask questions and I find answers. Today's question comes courtesy of Betty Davis from Gloucester, Massachusetts, who wants to know, is it in fact a crime to remove these labels? Now you find these guys on pillows, mattresses, even a lot of winter coats, and the reason why is because you cannot see what is inside of those items. Now today, pillows, for example, are usually stuffed with feathers or cotton or some kind of synthetic material. But according to Maggie Terry, back in the day, they put some pretty gnarly stuff in the stuffing.
I mean, it used to be years ago, they'd throw anything they wanted to into the bedding. Newspapers, dirty rags.
Horsehair, used hospital or hotel mattresses, corn husks.
Sweepings off the floor, part of their lunches, droppings, I mean, anything.
For starters, that's disgusting, and furthermore, it's dangerous and unhealthy. So today, a lot of states require these labels that tell you what is inside of the item. And it is against the law to remove them. Sort of. Retailers and manufacturers can be fined if they remove the labels, but once you buy it or I buy it, if you read closely, most of these end with the line, except by the consumer. So there you have it. Feel free to rip away. Don't forget to follow and tell us what you are curious about because, hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Harwick III. Stay curious out there.